Hi students, it's Shayna from EspressoEnglish.net, and today I'm going to teach you how to use worse and worst correctly. Even some native English speakers confuse these words. But after watching this lesson, you'll understand the difference clearly. Worse, ending with E, is a comparative adjective that compares two things. For example, the second book in the series was worse than the first one. Killing someone is worse than stealing from them. Her previous boyfriend was annoying, but her current one is worse. I was already sad, and after hearing about the tragedy, I felt even worse. The food at this restaurant has gotten worse over the past few months. We often use worse in these structures. A is worse than B, or A is bad and B is worse. Or something is getting worse. That means it's becoming more bad compared to how it was before. It's getting worse. We can also say even worse to add extra emphasis to how bad the second thing is. Here are a few additional expressions using worse, ending with an E. It could be worse means this situation is not so terrible. For example, my job is kind of boring, but it could be worse. At least I have a job. So being unemployed is worse than having a boring job. To be worse off means to be in a worse situation. For example, no matter how bad things are, there's always someone worse off than you in a worse situation. For better or worse means whether the situation is good or bad. For example, we promised to stay married for better or worse. The word worst, ending in T, is a superlative adjective used when we compare one thing to multiple other things. Let's look at some examples. He is the worst player on the team. That's the worst movie I've ever seen. She's the worst employee I've ever hired. This was the worst earthquake in history. We typically say the worst. Don't forget the word the. It's a common error to say things like, he is worst player on the team. It should be, he is the worst player on the team. When talking about your experiences, it's common to use the structure, the worst thing I've ever, and then a verb in the past participle. The worst movie I've ever seen. The worst employee I've ever hired. The word worst is also used in these expressions. Worst of all means this is the worst thing in a series of bad things. For example, our flight was delayed and our luggage was lost. Worst of all, it rained the entire time we were on vacation. If worst comes to worst means if the worst situation happens. For example, if worst comes to worst and both of you die in an accident, who will take care of your kids? And finally, want something in the worst way means to really want something very much. For example, my brother's car is really old. He wants a new one in the worst way. What about the pronunciation of worse and worst? Well, worse ends with a S sound, worse, and worst ends with a st sound, worst. However, when speaking fast, it's common for that final T sound to disappear. So sometimes worst sounds like worse, again, when speaking fast. But an easy way to know when someone is saying worse comparing two things, and when someone is saying worst comparing one thing to multiple other things, is by considering the whole structure of the sentence. Again, if they say one thing is worse than another, they're comparing two things. If they say something is the worst, then they're comparing one thing to all other things. The opposite of worse is better, and I'm here to help your English get better. You can learn more from me when you join one of my online courses. Just click on the link in the video description for more information and free sample lessons. At Espresso English, you can improve all your English skills, from grammar to vocabulary, speaking, listening, reading, and much more. I hope you enjoyed today's lesson, and I hope to see you inside one of my courses. Bye for now.